All right, welcome back. We're moving on to the nervous system. So the brain and the neurons, this might fascinate you, and I would love to do so much more with this lecture, but I'm going to kind of keep it to the basics so I don't overwhelm you. So when it comes to the nervous system, it's like the head honcho, the big boss. And what it's going to do is send electrical signals between the brain and then the body via nerve fibers. So we're going to have to respond. So remember I talked about those feedback systems very long. So it will detect something as stimulus, and then we had to send, the receptors are going to receive the signal, send it to the brain, and the brain's going to decide how do we react, send it to the muscles, so we have to maybe move and all the other stuff. Now, it's very fast. If you don't even think about, if you put your hand on a hot stove and or you forget that, and how fast it goes from the signal heat receptors on your skin all the way going up the nerves all the way to your brain, then going back down, telling you to move your hand because it's hot and you're going to possibly burn yourself. Very fast, very precise. Now, it does work with the endocrine system quite often to help maintain homeostasis. Now, most animals, as I'm kind of talked about, do have some type of nervous tissue, except for sponges. This arrays can vary. We started talking about with jellyfish how they start to have those very primitive ones. We started to see cephalization happens and starting to see the early brain starting to happen. Now, you can have two different types of systems. We do have two, sorry. You have the central nervous system, abbreviated CNS. This is your brain and your spinal cord. And then you also have the peripheral nervous system, or your PNS, which is all the nerves that lie outside your CNS. And both of these do work together. So let's talk about the anatomy of a neuron just a little bit. So a neuron is just an individual nerve cell, and it's going to conduct electric signals throughout the body. And the length can vary depending on where it is. It can be very short, or it can actually be really long. Now, some of the key parts, you're going to have the cell body, and this is where you're going to have the nucleus and the organelles. Now, off of that cell body, you're going to see these kind of long extensions, or pretty short, but they can be long. These are going to receive signals from other cells or receptors. So it's going to be like the receiving area. Now, then you're going to have this axon. So long extension. This is going to conduct the nerve impulse to the next cell or the target cell. So it's going to be a communication. We're going to see a signal from here, received by the dendrites. That's going to cause another signal to be transmitted through the axon to the next cell, and so on. So it's a big communication network. Now, around that axon, you might see a myelin sheath that surrounds it, and it provides some protection around the axon. Now, we're going to have a terminal end of a neuron right here. At the end of the axon right here, you're going to have the neurotransmitters. These are particles filled with these signals, which are called neurotransmitters, and they're just little chemical signal molecules. Now, although neurons are very close, they're actually not connected. There's actually a little bit of space in between them. And what happens is you kind of go through and the signals are released, and then they're recognized by the adjacent neuron, and it's just a whole signaling cascade that happens. Now, that area where they go through and locate really close to the next one is called the synapse. It's where the axon terminal interacts with this target, which is a dendrite of the second neuron. So we can have the presynaptic cell, it's the one delivering the message, and the postsynaptic, which is the one receiving it. Now, one way that you can interfere with this communication is to block the neurotransmitters, or the receptors. So this can be done with stimulants, which increase activity so they make them more receptive, or depressants, which is going to decrease the activity. Now, this is where a lot of medical drugs come into that. So if we want to go through and regulate it, or we can increase it or decrease it. So think of serotonin, dopamine, opioids, and what they do. Now, if you take that in excess, sometimes you can get a dependence on them. So what that happens is then you have to take a higher dose in order to see the same effect. So it can be quite dangerous. So let's talk about the spinal cord just a little bit. This is going to make up your CNS with the brain. Now, within the spinal cord is where we're going to conduct information between the peripheral nervous system and the brain. So this is just looking like an overall view of it, and this is just doing a cross section. So what you're going to see is we're going to have sensory information travel up and into the brain via the spinal cord, and then motor information is going to travel down to some of the effectors. So it's kind of like a network going up and down. Now it's going to be composed of what we call white and gray matter. The white is the myelinated nerve tracts, or the bundles of nerves, and the gray is the unmyelinated cell bodies. Now, as they connect, it's really weird. It crosses over to the other side. I don't know why. It's just the way it does. So the left side of your brain controls the right side of your body and vice versa. I find that quite interesting. It's just one of those weird things that happens. It seems like a waste, but hey, Mother Nature, you never know. So next up is the brain, the big information center. And it's pretty much your center for information integration. Now it's going to be broken up into different parts, and they have different functions and that control different commands. So you'll have your cerebral cortex, your limbic system, the basal ganglia, thalamus, hypothalamus, cerebellum, brainstem, and the retinas. Now we do have certain parts. We have the corpus callosum. It's going to connect in the right hemispheres of your brain. So this is just showing one side, but if we looked at a front view, it'd have like a right hemisphere and a left hemisphere. Now the function of the two hemispheres is largely redundant. I love to look at documentaries and stuff that talk about when they remove parts of the brain, how people are able to function. It's really quite fascinating how specific and how brain surgery has to be. So the first big part we'll talk about is the cerebellum, which is the cerebral cortex. And it's just that wrinkled gray matter, pretty much that forms the majority of the brain when you think about it. Now, it's going to form, like I said, performing the majority of surface or just composition of the brain in general. Now, we do break it up into different types of lobes. You'll have your frontal lobe, which is thought that control complex thought and emotion. Your primary motor area, which is going to send voluntary commands to your skeletal muscles, and then you're going to have a prefrontal area, which is going to be essential for critical thinking and planning and can affect your personality formation. So when people have damage to certain areas of this brain, that's why you might see changes in personality and mood, because it could be problems in the certain part of the frontal lobe. Now the parietal lobes right here are essential for a process of touch and spatial information. This is where you're going to find your primary sensor area, where you're going to have that touch sensor information to understand the world around you. Now you do have your temporal lobe, shown in green right here, helps process sound information and memory. And then finally, the occipital lobe, which is going to help process visual information. Now we kind of introduced some of these a little bit earlier. So the thalamus is going to be a gateway to and from the cortex of your brain. Now it's going to receive all the sensory input except for smell. That's one instance that was kind of left out. But it's going to kind of be like the processing center and send it to the appropriate location of the cerebrum, sorry, I keep saying that wrong. And it's going to be very important for memory and emotion. Now within that, you're going to have the pineal gland that's going to help secrete melatonin to control your sleep-wake cycles. So I know my younger sister, her 4-year-old, is having trouble sleeping, so they give them some melatonin to help with the sleep cycles. It's thanks to the pineal gland, sometimes it doesn't secrete enough. Now we did talk about the hypothalamus a little bit more earlier, so if you're getting to this interior part right here, and this is going to be the center where we're going to maintain homeostasis, the endocrine system. So how we're regulating that internal thermostat is really important right here. And then I talked about the pituitary glands in the endocrine system and how they're essential for producing hormones. Finally getting to the cerebellum. I know I keep calling cerebrum cerebellum. You think they get like a little bit more different in the names. Now this is at the base of the brain and helps maintain your posture and your balance right here. So it's going to be important for coordinating those voluntary muscles for smooth muscle movement and learning new motor skills. So it's a really important area right there. Finally, you have your brainstem, which connects your brain to your spinal cord on the bottom right there. And within that, you're going to have several other parts. You're going to have the midbrain, which is going to control your visual and auditory reflex centers. The medulla oblongata, I always think of water boy when I read that. It's going to regulate your heartbeat and your breathing, as well as when you vomit, when you cough, sneeze, and your hiccup reflexes. And then the pons falls into this part right too, where it's going to link your medulla to your midbrain, controlling your breathing, allowing for voluntary control. So you might not see all those, but they are located in this part right here. So another thing that's included in this briefly that's talked about is your limbic system. So this is where you have that complex network that attaches emotions to higher mental functions. Because some people just get emotional about everything, but why is that? No, so when you have mental stress, and when you're stressed, it can lead to higher blood pressure, and there are certain things that can actually lead to other emotion, pleasure sensations from food and sex and all the other stuff. It's all thanks to your limbic system. Now, there are several parts. You have the hippocampus, which is going to be essential for memory formation. Some of us, I think the hippocampus works very well. Some of us not that well. The amygdala, I'm saying that wrong probably. This is where we're going to attach emotion to memory. Sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's negative. It can be good or bad. It's kind of interesting to see how do we decide what's good and what's bad, or what pain actually is. It kind of makes you think about way over our heads when it comes to that kind of stuff, but it's kind of interesting how certain memories can bring good feelings and certain memories can bring bad feelings. Now, both of these areas are associated with the prefrontal area that allows for rational control over small emotional reactions. Some people can't control that prefrontal things and they just get super emotional. Other people, it seems like they have no emotion at all. For me, I guess that area, it's really triggered if I see dog movies where the dog dies, but if it's a people movie, not so much. I don't know. I'm probably overthinking this, but it's interesting. So when you have damage to this area or any of these, you might see these associated with people that have sociopathy or psychopathic disorders. So memory, which I think that's quite interesting, how we have short-term memory and long-term memory. Now, your prefrontal area is going to control your short-term memory, and that can last from minutes to weeks, kind of what you use to help study for classes. Now, your long-term memory is where the hippocampus and the temporal lobes come together, and this is where you're going to attach facts, situations, people, emotions, and this can last from years to decades. Some people have that photographic memory. That's another area that I would love to explore. Now, memory, can be good and bad, but it's something that we can eventually lose. There's all those memory games that you can play that kind of help preserve it. Alzheimer's, very sad. This is where you see a progressive loss of memory as parts of your CNS start to degrade. We still don't know what causes this, but there is no cure. So play brain games. This is a link to some brain games that you can play to keep your brain in shape. So we talked more about the central. Let's talk about the peripheral just a little bit, just one side. So this is where we're going to connect the CNS to the rest of the body. So you're going to have the somatic system and then the autonomic system. Now the somatic system, I'm sorry, it cut off some of the words right here. I didn't realize it did that. I should fix that, but I probably won't. And what the somatic system is going to carry your external sensory input into the CNS and the voluntary motor commands out of the body. A lot of words right there. Pretty much your reflexes, how you, these involuntary responses to stimuli. You really can't control them, but it's done through the sensory input that when it reaches the brain, and then it tells you to kind of adapt to that. Now, the autonomic system is going to regulate the automatic involuntary activity of these glands, the cardiac, and your smooth muscle. Now, that's broken up further into your parasympathetic and your sympathetic divisions. One of them, the parasympathetic, maintains homeostasis when you're in this relaxed state. So you're kind of just chilling, watching Netflix. So you go through digestion, your heart rate gets low, your pupils constrict, so you're able to watch more TV. Versus sympathetic, this is that flight or flight. And this is where you'll start to see your heart rate accelerate, dilate your eyes, and all the other stuff. So you're more alert. You're going to send more glucose and oxygen to your muscles because you're probably going to have to get up and run. I just want you to appreciate there's different parts of it. I'm not going to ask you questions on the specific functions. Now, lastly, there are problems that can happen. So we have illnesses that happen when we have loss of nervous system functions. It can worsen as more neurons die. Alzheimer's, this is one of them. It's the most common causes dementia in the elderly, which is quite painful. 1 in 8 people over the age of 65 experience this. They start to see memory loss. They have difficulty planning or executing tasks, poor judgment. You start to see personality changes. We have found that some genes have been associated, but what's really sad, there's no cure, and we're just managing symptoms. Parkinson's disease, another one, really painful. 50,000 to 60,000 people per year diagnosed. My dad had a condition very similar to this, and I lost him too, but you eventually see loss of movement, tremors, changes in speech, and problems with balance and posture. There's no cure. You're just easing the symptoms. It has been shown to be linked to genetics, but there are environmental factors that have been shown to cause this. There are other ones, so neurodevelopmental. So this is when the development of the nervous system is disturbed. One thing that has really brought up a lot of controversy, and we're learning more about this, is the autism spectrum disorder. And I don't think we should call it a disorder. I think that's wrong. But we've heard of the spectrum before. And the severity of it can vary from person to person. My nephew was diagnosed with autism, and you know, there's just so much that we just don't know about it. Characteristics can be wide range. Most of the time you'll see impaired social skills. They have a difficult time reading social skills, lack empathy. They do these STEMs, these repetitive motor behaviors, and the causes are widely unknown. We are starting to probably think to link some with the genetics. It's not from vaccines. Please don't. That paper's been disproven and other stuff. But we are learning to recognize this earlier and improve it with behavioral therapies and medication. This is a good one, learning a lot more about it. Another one, ADHD. Both of these are more common in males. With this one, you're going to see lack of focus, and they're unable to actually do high-functioning things and are very hyperactive. Once again, we don't know the cause, but there are several genes that we think might lead to them. And then finally, mental illness. We're seeing a lot more of this come up, especially with people being in isolation. Basically, this links to problems with thinking and mood, and affects more people than you know, probably 1 in 17. Now, there are all kinds of different types: schizophrenia, depression, bipolar disorder, OCD. Treatment varies. I just want you to kind of appreciate like all the diversity of all these different disorders. So lots of information in the brain. Here are lots of review videos that will be probably helpful, and don't be afraid to ask questions, and as usual, credit for the images.